If you have a Bible, go ahead and open it to Luke chapter 14. If you don't have one, there's one in the chair in front of you. I appreciated Sean sharing last week, and the next couple of weeks we're a little bit busy, so I'm really thankful. Tim Brady will be here next week. And then the week after that, Nate Milheim will be here to share from the book of Luke as well. We got a busy few weeks. My wife and I are launching our second of two kids on Tuesday at Cal Poly, so we'll be crying on Wednesday and empty nesters sometime after that when we collect our brain. The other thing is, I always go elk hunting with Jeff Clipmas, bow hunting in Montana in September, so as soon as we launch him and get that going and come back in a few days, we'll be going off. And I threw my back out a week and a half ago doing some stupid stuff, and so my pack is just trashed. And so I was over at Jeff's house with my wife delivering a truckload of gear and talking to Jeff about it. Next thing I know, I'm home emailing back and forth with Jeff about women's support garment on Amazon.com that I purchased. $50 women's support garment. It's also called a girdle, but the word garment makes me more comfortable. I emailed Jeff and I said, "What size did you buy?" And he responded back, "Do you know how weird this conversation is?" To which I responded, "Quickly, if you buy it now, they're giving away free Spanx." So if you want to know where my mindset is this morning, this will give you an idea. In a week and a half, instead of picturing me and Jeff both riddled with the terrain, with blood on our pants, carrying bows in Montana, picture us in girdles, cooking with our panini in our tent. That's a much more accurate of Jeff and I, all kind of because of his brother.
Way too close.
That's way too close. Luke chapter 14, verse 1. It happened that when he went into the house of one of the leading Pharisees on the Sabbath to eat bread, they were watching him closely. The scene is set in verse 1, and it continues this way until verse 25. We're going to actually cover this section from verse 15 to 24. It was just a kind of a scheduling deal, and then Tim will come back and cover this first section that took place. How you doing, man? That took place in the first 14 verses, where a leading Pharisee is basically having people over for dinner, and Jesus will give them some instruction, and Tim will take you through this on basically how to invite people and how that ought to take place. And so what they did during these times, when the Pharisees got together, and this is a leading Pharisee, they were a very high social rank. This is a highbrow party. This isn't just some, grilled cheese sandwich kind of luncheon. These are high social status, highly wealthy people, and so the people that were invited by this leading Pharisee were highly wealthy. And so this is a to-be-seen gig. This is a raise my social level by being at this thing. So anybody that is around the table is there for a very good reason. I'm there because you're there, and you're high status, therefore I'll be seen that way as well. And people ask, well, then why are people like, the village prostitute? How does she end up at a dinner party like this? Well, what they did, because they didn't want to look like they were highbrow, was they left the door open during these dinner parties to signify for the village, see how open we are to the surrounding community, see how loving we are, anybody is welcome. And then when somebody actually did come in that wasn't supposed to be there, they gave the look of hell, which was, you don't really belong here amongst all of these people. And so this is the scene around this table. Look at verse 15. Excuse me. And when one of those who was reclining at the table with him heard this, so there's a conversation that's been going on. He, now wanting to be heard, this Pharisee says, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." It's quite a Middle Eastern setting. A famous rabbi, a very, very famous rabbi. In fact, at the time, Jesus was probably the most famous rabbi in Israel, is in your town. You are with the socially elite. Of course you want this guy to come over. You want him to come over for two reasons. Number one, if you agree with him, he will lift your status even higher because he's in your house. Number two, you want to check him out. Because if you don't agree with him, you want to stifle him, which is what they usually did when he showed up, because he never really behaved properly, which is how I've patterned my life after this. And at the end of history, the Jews believed that there was going to be a great banquet. And this banquet, this huge dinner party, if you will, at the end of the ages, was called the Messianic banquet, where Messiah would sit at the head of the table. All of those gathered were only those that belonged. They would be around the table, and for once and final time, they would say, "Now we belong." The tyranny of life and the darkness and brokenness of life is behind me. I'm at a table with the Messiah, enjoying myself. Look, I've made it. The Messiah has brought me in. The Messianic banquet is extremely famous. And so when you read this reference to what this guy says, we don't know it, but that's exactly what he's speaking of. Oh, blessed is anybody that gets to sit, which really means blessed is any Jewish pious person like us that gets to sit at this table at the end of the ages and break bread with the Messiah at the end of the kingdom. And what you would expect this famous Rabbi Jesus to say is something like, "Oh, that we would live a pious enough life that we would be included in that banquet at the end of time. Oh, that we would live our life according to Torah in such a way, in such a life of perfection before God, that we would be included around that table." But Jesus never seems to cooperate at all. So just some history behind this statement. 4 pieces of history, if you will, that I think will help you understand a little bit about what this Messianic banquet was all about. The first piece of history was about 700 years before Jesus' time. And it's found in the book of Isaiah. And in the book of Isaiah, he's the one, the prophet, who introduces for the first time ever this idea that when Messiah fulfills the end of time, there will be a Messianic banquet. So it's a 700-year-old history of thought behind this Messianic banquet. Isaiah 25, can you throw that up for me? This is what it says. "The Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all peoples." Now, if you were here for our 9-month study of the Old Testament last year, when we just raced through the entire Old Testament story, what does all peoples mean? Jews and Gentiles. This means everybody. In the Bible, there are only 2 groups of people: Jews and not Jews. That's the rest of us. So the picture Isaiah is painting, this prophet is painting, is that a banquet where everybody belongs. You get that? That's the most significant thing of those statements. And it'll be on a mountain, a banquet of aged wine. This is the place I have to go to now. Choice pieces with marrow. Oh my gosh, Ron Fear's favorite food in the world, bone marrow. And refined aged wine. You got to say it twice because it's the most important part. And on this mountain he will swallow up the covering which will be over all the peoples. And even the veil which is stretched out over all the nations. Are you catching a theme? He will swallow up death for all time. And the Lord God will wipe tears away from all faces. He'll remove the reproach of his people from the earth. For the Lord has spoken, and it will be said in that day, "Behold, this is our God for whom we have waited, that he might save us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us rejoice and be glad in this salvation." During the time of Isaiah, this idea of this Messianic banquet was introduced 700 years before Jesus. A time where tears are wiped away, death is no more, there's no longer disagreement between people, and all people are gathered. Those that want to be are around the table, Jew and Gentile together, having a meal with the best wine and the best food with Jesus. Right? In our case. But Messiah. Thou let forward another 100 years. The next piece of history was the exile. We'll call it around 600 BC. That's close enough. The late 6th century. Israel is split in 2. It is only Judah in the south that is left. Babylon comes in. They destroy Judah in the south. They annihilate the temple. And they cart the Israelites, almost all of them, off to Babylon to a foreign land. So they're exiled off their land. Several decades later, a remnant of those Judahites, those Jewish people in the south, were allowed to return to their land. And as centuries passed, the synagogues got established, and the Old Testament scriptures were always read in those synagogues in Hebrew. But the common folks did not understand Hebrew, and so they would read the text in the synagogue in Hebrew, but it would be translated orally into Aramaic. And slightly before Jesus' time, they actually took this conversation, this reading from the Old Testament in Hebrew, that they would then translate into Aramaic, and they actually wrote it down. And it's a lot like if you've ever read the Living Bible. How many of you have ever read the Living Bible or the Message? If you look at the Bible in your chair, it's a translation, right? It's a translation. It's trying to take the exact words of Hebrew and Greek and Old and New Testament and translate them for us. Well, the Living Bible goes beyond that, or the Message goes beyond that. The attempt of the Living Bible and the Message is to not just translate, but also to interpret. That's why I don't like reading them, because if I've studied a passage and I think I know at least kind of what it means, and then I'm reading the Living Bible, it's telling me what it thinks it means, and I get frustrated with that. That's what this Aramaic translation is like. It's like the Living Bible. It was called the Targum. And in that Targum, it's interesting, it would be like 300 years from now, if you read the Living Bible, you would get an idea of what we thought today the Scriptures meant. The Targum was like that in Jesus' day. If you read this Aramaic written translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, it would give you an idea of how they interpreted the Old Testament. When you read the Targum and you look at the translation of what Isaiah said 700 years earlier, this is an excerpt from the Targum. Yahweh of hosts will make all the peoples, he's talking about Gentiles here, in this mountain, a meal. And although they supposed it was an honor, it will be a shame for them. And great plagues, and plagues which they will be unable to escape, plagues whereby they will come to their end. Does that sound at all like what we read in Isaiah 25? They had completely reinterpreted Isaiah's passage of this beautiful meal where everybody came together. And the reinterpretation in the Targum was, no, the Gentiles will not be here. They think they're going to be there, and the plagues will strike them dead, and they're not coming in. Only the pious Jews will be allowed. A third piece of history. At a similar time as the Targum translation, another document was written, and beside Brian, I don't know if anybody's actually read this, and I do not recommend it, by the way, called the Book of Enoch. Is anybody weird enough besides Brian and I, and Jeff Clipness, of course, have read the Book of Enoch? It's weird, isn't it? It is just really weird. You can figure out very quickly why it wasn't included in the canon of Scriptures. In the Book of Enoch, that was written around 200 BC, the writer also speaks of this messianic banquet. And he also says that the Gentiles will show up at this messianic banquet. But when they show up to dine at the messianic banquet, the angel of death shows up with his sword and slays every Gentile trying to come into the room for this banquet with the Messiah. And the blood runs so deep, the Book of Enoch says, that the Jews have to wade through the gore of the slain Gentiles to get to the banquet table to dine with Messiah. In 500 years, can you imagine the translation changing that much? From Isaiah's prophecy to now 200 years before that. A fourth piece of history, there was a third voice. Besides the Targum and the Book of Enoch, there was another group, the community at Qumran, that also came out with their own interpretation and display of what they thought this Messianic banquet was. We know the community of Qumran by the people that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you're familiar with those. They detested the wickedness of how the temple was run. And they were right, by the way. During the time of Jesus, it was run poorly, and it was being used to hurt people. They detested how deplorable the priesthood in Israel was. And so they were so sick of the Jewish approach to God. It was so corrupt that they said, we're done with it all. They extracted themselves from life. They moved down to the northwestern part of the Dead Sea in the desert. And they sat there and they devoted themselves to living pious lives and translating the Scriptures and waiting for Messiah. And their belief was, we're going to live so well before God. We're going to live with such perfection before God and with such faith that we will actually accelerate when the Messiah will come. In addition to all the copies they made of the Old Testament books, I believe everyone but the book of Esther. I think that's correct. I'm not even sure about that one. Maybe a copy of the book of Esther. They also had another scroll that they found, which was called the Messianic Rule. And in this scroll, it makes it very, very clear that Gentiles will have absolutely no part in the Messianic banquet. Only the pious Jews that observe the law will be there. It says this in the Messianic Rule. And there the Messiah of Israel shall come, and the chiefs of the clans of Israel, meaning only Israelites, only pious Jews, shall sit before him, each in the order of his dignity, according to his place in their camps and marches. It even goes on to say, no one smitten in his flesh, or paralyzed in his feet or hands, or lame, or blind, or deaf, or dumb, or smitten in the flesh with a visible blemish will be allowed to participate in the Messianic banquet. So this is, by the time Jesus is here, this is how far this had come. From Isaiah's interpretation that the Messiah will come and at the end of the ages wipe away tears, wipe away death, just insert joy. All this brokenness of our world is gone, and everybody under one roof loving one another, Jew and Gentile, had gotten to the place where not only Gentiles were not going to be there, but if you had a physical ailment, you weren't coming either, because God was obviously judging you for living poorly. This is the environment that Jesus finds himself in. This is the moralistic, non-relational, exclusive table that Jesus is sitting around in this passage. This is the kind of environment that surrounds the table that Jesus has now been inserted into the midst of. This judgmental, unloving, moralistic perfection of life is my goal. What I do and how I behave, that is the most significant thing. That is the environment that Jesus sits with. It is into that environment now that Jesus will speak a parable in response to this statement this Pharisee makes. It's a typical parable, a 7-stanza poem. We've looked at a bunch of these, inverted poem. In the middle of the poem is the key statement where the master does something that you don't expect him to do. So let's read that parable. Verse 16. But Jesus said to him, a man was giving a big dinner, and he invited many. And at the dinner hour, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready now. Now, in the Middle East, the way you did a party, the way you had a party was this. You sent out invitations. It was much like today. You would send out invitations to all the guests, and you would say, come, I'm going to have a huge party. Will you come? They would RSVP and say, yes, we will be there. And then that would give you an idea, okay, I've got 50 people coming, or I've got 100 people coming, or I've got 25 people coming. That gives me an idea now how much food to prepare. On the day of the meal, the master of the house would then have the appropriate food prepared, the animals killed that needed to be killed and prepped and cooked. And then when the meal was ready, the master would send his slaves out to the invited guests who have already RSVP'd their yes, by the way, on which he has based his meal preparations. He would send the slave out to say, dinner's ready. Show up. It's much like today, we say, we're going to have a party Sunday night at the McBride's. Can you come? Yes, I get 25 people, which is a typical number at our house. You show up, everybody's mingling and drinking a nice bottle of aged wine and having a hors d'oeuvre, and then I say, dinner is ready. That's the kind of feel it's that late in the game that these verses take place. If for some reason you say yes, and then you're unable to come, wow, do you have to make sure you're careful how you don't come. The goal, and it would only be in the most unforeseen circumstance that you now reverse your RSVP. Right? It's the day of the meal. The food is prepared. This is the dinner bell ringing when the slave comes out. And so, if for some unforeseen reason you have to tell the master, to tell the slave to tell the master, I can't make it, your whole goal will then be to save the face of the host. How do I say this in such a way that I save the dignity of the host so that the host realizes it's killing me to not be there? Does that make sense? But that's not what takes place. What the slave experiences is a set of 3 excuses from 3 different people. Verse 18. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said to him, I have bought a piece of land, and I need to go out and look at it. Please consider me excused. Another one said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm going to try them out. Please consider me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and for that reason, I cannot come. Everything is prepared, everything is cooked, and now they're going to offer excuses for not attending the meal 5 minutes before the meal itself. The first guest says, I bought a field. And at face value of all 3, this looks like the most okay. But the Middle East contains, if you've been there, a lot of desert. Maybe less than what's in your brain, but there's a lot of desert. And so agricultural cropland is at a premium in the Middle East, and it is so in Israel as well. No farmer in the Middle East is going to make this decision quickly. It takes often months in Israel to make a purchase decision, and sometimes years over a particular piece of land. You have to investigate the heck out of that piece of land. What kind of drainage does it have? What kind of crop yields over history has it had? How does the piece of property face the winter sun? Does it have fruit trees? If it has fruit trees, how old are the fruit trees? And how have they produced? Decision after decision after decision. But the first guest says, I just bought a field, and now I have to go look at it, so I can't come. This would be like me getting in my car at 5 o'clock, calling Linda up saying, I just bought our new house we're going to move into. I'm going to go look at it now to see what it looks like. This is utterly ridiculous. You see, the goal of this guest is not to save the face of the host. It's exactly the opposite. The intention of this statement is to insult the host. This is, yes, I'm coming, even though I'm not, and I'm going to wait till the last second, and then I'm going to give some lame excuse that will make him feel like dirt. Does that make sense? It's a deep insult. The next guest with the 5 oxen is more obnoxious than the first. Every farmer knows that you would never buy oxen unless you have test-driven them. They need to be in sync. Oxen need to pull together. They need to tire at the same time. They have to be in sync. You would never buy oxen without taking them out for a cruise. That just would not take place. And what this guy is saying is, I just bought 5 oxen, and now and they're already purchased, by the way, and now I'm going to go take them out for a test drive, so of course I can't show up for the meal. Again, the goal of this excuse is to insult the host of this banquet. The third guest is by far the most offensive of all. And you know that because the third guest doesn't even say, please consider me excused. He just says, and for that reason, I ain't going to come. It's abrupt. And I will be careful how I say this, but it sounds like when you read this in English that I just got married. That's not what he's really saying. This is a Hebrew idiom. What he's really saying is, I got married recently, and she's in the back room, and I'm busy with her. You would never speak this way in the Middle East. We are crass about relationships and intimacy in relationship in our society. They were not. This is an extremely crass relational comment about his wife. I'm in the back room, we're busy, I ain't coming. This is the insult of all insults. After hearing his master insulted 3 times, the servant gives up and returns. The analogy should be obvious to us. The Pharisees are around the table. The goal of their life is perfection. The goal of their life, they think, is how well am I morally living? It is an equation that you've been listening to me speak of in the Gospel of Luke for weeks and weeks, to the point you must be saying to yourself, does Jesus ever say something new? The equation that they have, this moralistic view, the view that what I do is the most important thing, ultimately flips on a coin where then you are so hiding behind the actuality of what you are like, you then have to become judgmental of other people. If you are not honest with your own soul about how weak you are, how messed up you can be, how dark your thoughts can be, how broken you really are, then the only other way is to try to hide behind a moralistic view. And when you hide behind a moralistic view, the only thing you can do is pick everybody else apart. It's a simple equation. It's one or the other. And it is to that equation that Jesus is speaking. And Jesus, in this parable with this master, is beckoning these people to come and just be real for a second. Just come and sit at a table that you realize you have no business sitting at. And in thankfulness, realize you have no business being at the Messianic banquet with Messiah, and yet He beckons you to come. And all of that other stuff will drop away. But they don't. They hold on to their moralistic view, and they sink with it. Verse 21. And the slave came back and reported this to his master. Then the head of the household became angry and said to his slave, "Go out at once into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor, and the crippled, and the lame, and the blind." You see, the question now is, what will the master do with his anger? Let me ask you this question. What doesn't the master do with his anger? Say it? Cancel the party, right? He doesn't become a victim. Well, nobody likes me. Nobody wants to come over. You know what? Forget it. Forget it. I'm just going to take my ball and go home. There's none of that, by the way, with God. It's obvious who the master is, right? You all got that, right? I said, like, read the last page of the story, right? What else doesn't he say? He doesn't yell at them. Fascinating. Even more than that, Kyle, he doesn't make them come. Isn't that fascinating? This is God. He's comfortable with your decision if you want nothing to do with him. It breaks his heart, but he's not going to force anybody to be a part of him. Isn't that fascinating? He's angry. He's frustrated. He knows that they're as lost as you can be by trying to hide behind your moralism, doesn't he? He knows that. And it frustrates him that they're using that to hurt other people. But he never goes beyond that line. Instead, he turns his anger into grace. He picks another option. This is the surprise of this. And what's amazing is, he invites the poor, the lame, the blind, and the crippled. Have you heard those four before? All the people the community of Qumran, the Essenes said, would never get into the Messianic banquet. And now Jesus is speaking right into that, saying, this is then who will sit with me at my table. And I want them there. Isn't that fascinating? Jesus is speaking, in this case, to the outcasts of Israel. Jesus is speaking to the marginalized, to the people that can't cut it, the people that wake up and say, why do I do the same thing over and over? Why did I make that decision and mess my family up? Why did I make that decision and mess up my work? Why can I not get this right? Those are the people that Jesus says, wow, you're the ones I want to run the table. And they're all looking around like, me? And he's going, oh, you're exactly who I want to dine with. Verse 22. And the slave said, Master, what you commanded, I did it. And still there is room. And the master said to his slave, go out now into the highways, meaning go beyond the city limits, along the hedges, and compel them to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste of my dinner. period of time elapses. And Jesus realizes, the master realizes in this case, the room is not full, and there's more time to bring more in. Now go beyond the city limits. In this case, go beyond Israel. Go to the Gentiles. And we'll find out that this passage doesn't end, by the way. You don't find out who comes in, because really the book of Acts is really the completion of this parable, and on into today, where the apostles go out and invite the Gentiles into the Messianic banquet, so that they can fulfill what Isaiah's desire always was. And there's this weird statement that was misunderstood for centuries. Go out into the highways and the streets and compel them to come in. Now, those of us that are afraid of God kind of get this, grab them by the scruff of their neck and drag them in, right? If you grew up Lutheran or Catholic or a couple other things, you might be thinking that, like, just browbeat them until they get in the house. That's not what this word compel means. The idea behind this word compel them to come in is, go out and invite people that never thought they'd get an invitation. And oh, by the way, they're never going to believe you. They're never going to think they belong at a banquet with me. And so you have to do whatever it takes to convince them how much they belong at a table with me. Grab them by the hand. Walk them there individually if you have to. Tell them over and over and over how welcome they are in my house. That they're not just some guest that just got in by the scruff of their neck. That I want them there. They're exactly why I prepared this meal. That's what this word compels means. It means do everything it takes to make them feel like they can come in. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited now shall taste of my dinner. Jesus switches from this plural you. It is no longer the master in the parable speaking, but Jesus himself. No longer is it some master that's talking. For I tell you, Jesus says. Jesus' comment is, I'm the Messiah. I'm the master in the story. It's my banquet, actually, that you're poo-pooing. I'm the host that you have insulted with your moralistic, non-relational view. We do not get Christianity in this country. I was on the phone 2 days ago with somebody, a little bit younger than me. And we were talking through stuff, and this person was just broke down in tears. And I heard this statement that I've heard in the inside of this noodle many times. It's an age-old line. The statement was that the person came back and said, they said, what's wrong with me? Why am I not past this already? Why have I not figured this out already? I should be farther along than this. I should get God more. The most hilarious statement I heard was because this person knows both Jeff and I, and trust me, I've spent a lot of time with Jeff. I know this isn't true, and I definitely know this isn't true of me. How come I can't be like you and Jeff? You just have faith all day long. I'm thinking, you got the wrong Doug and Jeff there. Who are you talking to?
Sorry for laughing so loud.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry for laughing so loud. Oh, you just seem to have God right in front of you all day long. I said, what are you smoking? Do you know how fleeting my mind is? The thought of God comes in, goes out, comes in, goes out. Things happen in a good way in my day, and I have no sense that God just kind of took care of something for me. A lack of gratitude, a lack of knowledge. Any of this sound familiar? My comment to this person was, that is not God who is talking to you. You are listening to the voice of the enemy. God would never say that to you. God is the one sending out people into the streets to compel you to know how much you belong in this house. Amen? This is the story. If you're coming here every week and you're looking for another story, switch churches. Because you're going to hear the same stinking story every week. And it's not my story, it's God's. Because He knows how feeble we are. He knows how weak we can be. He knows that when we're honest for a moment, how off we really are. How inconsistent we really are. And guess what? We're exactly who He wants at the table. He is not fixated on my perfection. I should be fixated on His. When you get into this place where you are consumed with your failure, when you're consumed with why I can't get things right, you are becoming a self-absorbed Pharisee. Drive that out of your brain stronger than you've ever driven something away from yourself. Feel the Master imploring you to come into the house and sit at the table and just let the wine run with Him. Do you sense that from Him? He's compelling us. The reason He compels us is He knows what our reaction will be. I'm really not fit for this. The only reaction that is not fit is the Pharisaical reaction that says, I've got it together. That's the only reaction Jesus says in this parable that is not fit for the kingdom. If you want to pretend that your life is about what you do and how well you do it, you are not fit for the kingdom of God. I'll tell you that right now. But if you want to say He loves the schmuck, and I dig that about Him, just the way it is, inconsistencies and all, He loves this. And of course, He wants me to be able to live well. He wants me to be able to see how His life works out if I follow Him. But not because I impress Him more by doing it, but because it's just an easier way to go. Our goal is to remain honest about our own soul every day, in constant need of God. And in that recognition, we sit at the table and we look to our right, and God is saying to me, pass the food, will you? And how was your day? As the juice just runs down His jowls and laugh. Amen? Let's pray. Jesus, You compel us to feel welcome. You compel us to know that there's nothing in our life that stands between us and You, if we're simply honest. We bring You our brokenness, Father. We want to be a church that does not look like other people. We want to be a place where we all know we desperately need You. We want to be a place, Father, that is honest enough to admit that we forget constantly that we're a people that doesn't realize we desperately need You. We love You. We love Your perfection. We love the look You give us. May we see that more clearly as a result of this passage. In Jesus' name we pray.